This is my second attempt at painting the Jade Emperor Pagoda in Ho Chi Minh City, and a chance to adopt a slightly different approach. So if anyone has seen my previous video, the link to it will be in the description, but in the timeline it should be the one before this one. This was my first attempt, so let me just go back to source photo. So this source photo, thanks again to Ravi, a friend of mine on Patreon, for the kind sharing of this image of the temple, this lovely, richly coloured entrance, and the lanterns, which attracted me to the scene. So this was attempt number one, standing back from the picture, going for a soft background, concentrating on the lanterns, perhaps a little bit quite tight for my kind of style. If anyone has seen my previous videos, I'm fairly loose as regards a painting style. So this was slightly different, a little bit out of my comfort zone, trying to go quite precise with those lanterns. But a chance on the second time to maybe go, well, true to the image, go in a little bit closer to the action and try and keep truer to the colours. Go a little bit colour. I was a little bit light, maybe a bit too light with the background on that one, on the background temple, on the background pagoda. But yes, on the next one, going richer, zoom in. The photograph is portrait in orientation. I'm going to stick to landscape, my preferred format. So let's see how we get on. As per normal, paper is Saunders Waterford, cold press, 300 grams in weight, 15 by 11 inches, and tape down, not stretched. First step, getting in the initial drawing. So try to go a little bit looser here. As I say, I'm zooming in. I'm truer to the source image. And I've started from the left-hand side, getting in the edge as a frame on the left-hand side, the lantern that this statue or object in front of the pagoda, to me, it looks like it's a multi-tiered lantern, and get that in. Then the top of the temple and a row of lanterns as a feature of the scene. Make sure I get those in right. So a few here running across the front of the entrance, almost an oval shape. Then just defining the side of the entrance, left-hand side, trying to get the line right for the side extensions to the main entrance, and above the entrance we've got that panel with the Chinese script on it. Above the entrance there's an overhanging roof. Down to the street level. Pencil I'm using is a 3B pencil. Again, my normal pencil. It creates, it's quite thick, so it creates quite thick lines that will help me see what I'm doing when I start painting, and I can still see those pencil lines showing through. I'm going to have a couple of figures actually in the entrance rather than, because I've zoomed in, a couple of figures there in the middle of the entrance. That's the background building, a modernish building. There's some ornaments, the couple of dragons at the very top of the entrance. That's the top of the lantern, just getting an indication of a few of the ribs to the lantern, if that's the right phrase, those vertical lines that go around the lantern, and then some tassels coming out the bottom. Continue the horizontals, make sure the perspective is right with the top there, just going up at a slight angle, almost horizontal at the street level. Just a little mention about my Patreon site as well. Go up to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. More information up there on lots of painting projects, postings, exclusive postings, a friendly watercolor community, image sharing, monthly projects. Check it out. Right, so onto the painting stage. I am pre-wetting the paper with a flat brush, a goat hair flat brush, actually avoiding the lanterns. Could have used masking tape or masking fluid around those lanterns, but I've never used masking fluid, rightly or wrongly, just my own preference. So I'm applying an even layer of clear water here across the scene. I don't need to be too precise with the actual painting around these lanterns with this water, just covering up most of the particularly the upper portion. Where I want to get in some soft transitions from the sky into the building itself. I'll go through the colours in my palette from the top: neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green. Had to think about it then. Viridian green, they're the same, never change. Cobalt green, which is going to be quite useful for the ornamental bits on the front of the pagoda, as per the last my first attempt at this scene. Stick to the same colour palette. Then we've got cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, lemon yellow. I used a bit of lavender down there at the side. I'm using a soft aqua mop brush here from Raphael. It's a synthetic mop brush. Good water retaining capability, good edge to it, good point to it while the point lasts. Obviously after a few months of regular use, you do lose the point of it, but it still continues to be a useful brush for me. Now with this sky, I've gone over that damp surface and just applying a little bit of extra colour into that damp surface to give the feeling of some soft clouds up there. It will dry lighter, so I need to, as I've said before, I need to compensate with going in a little bit darker. Now, an initial colouring here of with that cobalt green, the ornamental details on the top of the pagoda, and then halfway down above the entrance, we've got a roof going across the middle of the scene. Above the entrance, that's got quite a bit of I think they're probably glazed tiles. To me, they look quite shiny. And then the actual dragons and statues and ornaments on top of that, above that tiling. Right, going a bit stronger with the red compared to attempt number 1. See if this makes a difference. Be interested to know anyone who's seen attempt number 1 and this attempt number 2, which do you prefer? So attempt number 1 would have been a little bit more tight, standing back, looking more of a panoramic view of the front of the pagoda, going quite soft on the background, and then trying to emphasize the lanterns. This is more zooming into that entrance, going a bit richer on the colors, and a bit looser in style, in technique. Continuing quite rich on the lower part, down to the street level. Paint around these figures, not sure at this stage whether they'll be quite dark, those figures, but I'll keep my options open by painting around a little bit. Perhaps they could be light against the darker background, the recess, the entrance going into the temple. A little bit of careful painting around those lanterns on the right hand side. Don't need to be too precise, and with my brush marks I can be quite erratic with those brush marks, because it's just going to give a slightly different sort of subtle variation in the shades of red in the facade of the temple. Go a bit cooler on the street in front of the temple. There's a slight slope on my board, so the paint's accumulating a little bit along the bottom. I'll probably mop that up. The modern building in the top right corner, because the paint's still quite damp, that's giving me a bit of a soft edge on the skyline. And then there's a little tower on the right hand side. Paint that in. I've picked up now a smaller synthetic brush to go in while the paper's damp, going with a stronger mix of cobalt green on the tops of the building, that left-hand tower, the left-hand wing here. So I'm just strengthening up that that color, because otherwise, as it dries, it's just going to get too weak. And then immediately above, in the middle of the pagoda, there's some tiling, like a little bit of a roof at the very top. Paint around that bigger lantern, the biggest lantern. Cobalt green, actually mixing a little bit of viridian green and cerulean blue as well. You could probably get quite close to cobalt green by using that, by using a viridian and a little bit of blue, a cerulean blue. Perhaps a tiny bit of white gouache in there as well. That might give a pretty close proximity to that cobalt green. These are, I think they're dragons, and the left one, the right one, with a bit of a spiky back to them. Going for this soft edge here because the sky's still damp. The paint's going to mingle in there. Now going stronger with a bit of shadow underneath the top part of the pagoda. Right underneath those roofs. Just define that left-hand tower bit. Strong line underneath there. A vertical, that's at the side of the sign. Just underneath the sign. I'm using that Windsor red and the alizarin crimson, getting in quite a strong, it's like a coolish red, I think, on the colour of the building, if I could describe it as that. Just a little bit of red with a hint of a tiny bit of blue. And me painting in this style, at this stage of the painting, it probably looks an awful mess, but it will hopefully I'll be able to pull it back. And once I get into some stronger, darker lines, just pull it all together so that it looks, it gives more of the impression of what I wanted. But there's a sort of square plaque on the front of that left-hand tower. And then you can't hope to paint in any detail the ornaments above the on the rooftops here, so you just got to give the impression of them just with a few lines of the brush. Trying to create the impression of the tiles here. Just a few little tiles, not all of them. It does help if the paper's not drying too quick. So if I was in a very dry atmosphere, very dry place, or the paper wasn't particularly absorbent, then things might dry a little bit too quick, and I'd have to think about some other way to keep things moist. Maybe using a spray, little water bottle, or I know some people do wet their paper on both sides. That would keep it quite damp as well. But using good quality watercolor paper, particularly the cotton-based paper, that does tend to keep things a little bit wetter longer. You've got more time to play around with things and move the paint around. So those are the dragons at the top. Just painting a few more stronger horizontals going across the top. tend to mix my darker colours at the top of my palette, and then in the middle mixing well, generally cooler colours, blues, that sort of thing, and then at the bottom mixing well, warms, reds, yellows, oranges. I'm painting in now just a few windows of that background. I think it's like an apartment building, just a few, to indicate some structure in the background. Nothing too detailed. Mop up the bottom run of paint. That sort of bead that's accumulating at the bottom there. Otherwise, the danger is that could, as it dries, it could sort of spill back into the painting. It could give you or give me some blooms appearing at the bottom, which I don't want. I just want that to be quite smooth and simple in that foreground. Now there's a yellow border around the signage. Might need to go a bit stronger with that later on. Right hand side of the entrance, a few dark horizontals just to give the impression of the actual facade of the building. And I need to remember to put in the roof at the very top on that right hand side, and top of this little tower here, just a mirror image of the left hand side. Alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, neutral tint, and then come down the right hand side of the entrance. Find this synthetic brush quite useful for these sorts of marks. It's not too, the hairs aren't too long. There's not a brilliant point on it. It's almost flattish. So it does, and once you get used to how it handles, it's actually quite effective at creating these marks that I'm doing now. This would be quite difficult with a squirrel mop brush, for example, because that would just be too soft. I need something that's got a bit of spring in it, a bit stiffer as regards its handling. Almost dry paint there, not much water at all. Dry brush marks. The paper's slowly drying. If I didn't use a hairdryer, I probably got, with a good initial wash, I probably got maybe 10 minutes or so of 10 minutes, 15 minutes of working time while the paper's still drying. It's still damp, and I can get in these softish edges. You can always tell when it's drying because when I'm applying the paint now, it's going to get to it'd be quite thick. It's not going to move around a lot, and I'll need to then start adding a bit more water to the mixture. These lanterns here, they're sort of in front of the overhanging roof over the entrance, so I'm just going in a bit darker above those, quite loosely, just to sharpen up their edges. Over to the right hand side. Add a few darks to the left-hand tower. Burnt umber, ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson. Really, it's just got to be something dark here to create these horizontals. Not black, but just interesting mixes of colours. The actual sign, it's not red, the actual background of the sign. It's sort of like a greyish colour. So I'm just adding in some of that cobalt green just to sort of dirty it up a bit. It's not a uniform colour as well, the background. I've got a bit of a thicker brush here. This is an Pagoda brush, versatile, I think it is, a versatile brush. It's basically a bigger version of what I had before. Applying the paint quite thick, I will lighten this up a little bit by adding a bit of water and drag it down a bit as well, down to the below the rooftop, just to create the effect of some of the shadow underneath that roof. But I just need to define the edge of these tiles a little bit, just creating a stronger edge to this bottom bit of the roof. Be fairly careful with this, trying to get them each tile equal, and then below those tiles pure neutral tint there, but it's not too thick. It's just ever so slightly showing the red wash below. So that's just, as long as I don't go too thick, it's just sort of showing that that pinkiness through. stronger edge there. Paint around the figures. I'm not exactly sure what's behind the entrance, but I guess it just goes into a darker air, a darker room. There may be some lighting inside there, so it might be shining through and perhaps create a bit of a highlight on the top of some of these figures, just around the edges of the figures. Almost pure red there. Mix it in a bit with the black or that neutral tint. And on the left-hand side as well. There's lots of little writing going on the top of those red panels, but I'm not going to go to that level of detail. Just creating the impression of that stronger red either side of the entrance. I've added a diagonal there. Just think it needs it from a design point of view. Otherwise, I've just got all of these verticals and horizontals. So just adding in something a little bit different, a few angular shadows. It's not clear from the photograph where the sun is. I'm sure it can be very, very bright there sometimes, but when the photographs were taken, it would have been a bright, yet overcast day. Great day for taking photographs, but it can be a little bit challenging trying to work out where some of those shadows could be, or trying to introduce some lights and darks. So I'm sort of guessing it here, but from a design point of view, just create a few of those almost 45-degree angular bits. That's the steps for the entrance. Back with a small brush. Bit of brown, bit of neutral tint, and strengthen up the front of the building with a few darker lines. Just define the outline of the lanterns a bit more. Neutral tint, cobalt green, add a bit more detail to the top of the building on the right hand side, top of those ornaments. A sort of squarish plaque on the right hand side, just like the left hand side. Bit of detail on the tiling above the entrance. There's just so many things going on there above the entrance. Those of you who've got access to the photo on Patreon, when you can zoom in, you can see Well, the photograph's actually quite high res, so thanks Ravi for that. So you can zoom in and see the detail of it and all these little ornaments and statues and the detail on the tiling and the brickwork as well. Right, figures, bit of flesh colour and clothing. I'm just really making it up as I go along, so a lighter top for that one. For the other figure, slightly different colour. Maybe there's a bit of light hitting the front of this figure, so a few angular shadows across the chest, and then darker below. Keep it quite simple, quite loose. Let the body to some extent just blend into the background. Maybe they're moving towards us, so we can't give the sense of motion of the legs. You can't really. If I precisely painted the legs, it would just look a bit. I'd be reverting back to a tighter style. So keep it fairly loose and blend things in, connect things in. Use the finger to smudge things along. Bit of definition to the yellow border around the sign. It's not actually in the photograph, that darker line there, but I just thought to give that sort of embossed, that sort of slight rise of that yellow border, that'd be a bit better. Defining the tiling at the very top, not every tile, just an impression of a few of these curvy ends to the tile. And there's a few spiky bits to the tops of the ornaments on the top of the roof there. And now to the lanterns, which I want to keep quite bright, a strong red. They're going to be a bit stronger compared to the background, so a little bit like the first attempt I did at this scene. And I'm applying some clear water to the top left corner that I want to keep fairly light, where the light's just touching the top left corner of the lantern. And then I'll go in with the red. Bright red. Bigger brush again, just so that I can apply it a bit more quickly. And try and get that soft edge a bit darker on the base of the lantern on the right hand side. Can use the fingertips just to move things along a bit if it's not moving. But that last one was the most important one. I mean, that's the biggest one that the viewer might notice first, and then the eye might travel down this row of lanterns down to the entrance. And now the ones immediately in front of the roof, similar way, maybe a little bit lighter in colour because they're a little bit further away. So bottom of the lanterns and the right hand side. Darker on that one, that one, that one. Now a smaller brush, synthetic brush, just lift off some of that paint to the top left corner, squeezing the brush hairs with my fingers. So my left hand's going to get pretty dirty through this, but it doesn't matter. Just lifting off that. If my brush has got too much paint on it, I'll just dip it in the clear water there, and a sponge in the bottom right corner, just off camera. But the brush mustn't have too much, mustn't be too wet, but damp enough just to kind of suck up the paint, and just squeeze the finger there, just to squeeze the brush with the fingers, just to get out any paint from that. My lemon yellow, a few little tassels hanging down. You don't notice these on the left, but they're probably a bit more noticeable ones on the right. So it's quite moist yellow paint here, almost body paint, quite thick, not too much water. Just check how dry that sign is. And now going with the lettering. I need to use a small brush with a little bit of a flat edge to it for this lettering. And like in my last video, I'm trying to define just the basic shapes of them. There's three main words. So that's the first one, and then the middle one. First one is a bit more ornate than the second, well, the third one. The one on the right is actually quite a bit simple, a lot simpler. Right, this middle one, 3 lines there. Apologies to any Chinese viewers. This probably looks totally wrong, but I'm just giving the impression of this lettering, this sign. So bright red, and then when it's dry, I'll go in with because they're kind of embossed characters, I'll go in with a darker paint to create the shadows later on. Try and make these lanterns a bit stronger by going in darker in the background and just define them a bit more with this small brush. So immediately they're just starting to stand out a bit more, their curved shape. just added a bit more of the tiling colour, that cobalt green. Neutral tint, a bit more definition of the left-hand side of the entrance, and then within the entrance itself. Down to the bottom. Bit more on the steps, bit of a darker colour on the steps just to make them appear more step-like. So it's almost at the stage of the painting where I'm starting to pull things together, tidy things up, strengthen certain objects, defining other areas a bit more, going in a bit stronger with some of the edges. I've got the left and the right hand border to do yet. Few little tiles on that left hand side, just a few of them. There we go. And over on the right. Just needs another line in here, up to the edge of that the biggest lantern. So that just helps defining that left-hand side of that lantern a bit more. Then just continuing on the right-hand side of the lantern, just a few little marks. Neutral tint, alizarin crimson, steps, base of the building, not too detailed. This side here needs sorting out. It's a bit too light at the moment. I need to go a bit darker, a bit of shadow underneath the roof at the top of that column. So unlike my first attempt, I've got just a thin horizontal bit of the street at the bottom of in the foreground. So no, I'm not going to put any detail of the edges of the pavement in there, any detail. Figure in the recess, just add a darker jacket to that one. as I did in the first painting, my little flat brush here, this is another Raphael soft aqua synthetic brush, and just giving the impression of the edges of this lantern on the left-hand side. So it's the right-hand side of this lantern. Just a few marks to show there's something there. Quite a thick mix: burnt umber, neutral tint, alizarin crimson. And then down to, I guess this level here is now almost at shoulder level, maybe just below shoulder level. And there's a plinth or some platform with a little leg, a gap in there as well. Bring it down to the bottom. And then on the right-hand side, what I described in my first painting, I think it's a sort of rubber plant, or it's a big-leaved, glossy leaf plant. But it just needs to fill in that right-hand side, just creating a bit of a frame, and go all loose down the bottom, where there's there's like a smaller planter down there, and some smaller plants. So that now gives us a left-hand side and a right-hand side, and the focal point of the entrance. Still need to strengthen up these lanterns with the ribs and a bit of highlight. This area here is a little bit empty, so I'm just putting in a few lines just to fill it in. Not really totally accurate with these lines, but I'm just adding in a few more horizontals and verticals. Bit more dark around that lantern, down the right-hand side of the entrance. Just make these faces a bit stronger, and the arms might be a little bit too thick on that right hand figure. It's all right. Maybe that guy's an arm wrestler or something like that. Right, these ribs, they're actually like a lightish yellow in the photograph, but I'm going in with this darker colour just to make them stand out a bit more. These ribs going around on the outside, the kind of skeleton of the lantern. I did draw in pencil some of these lines, and I can't really see them anymore. So I'm just guessing where those lines will be, pretty much as I did on the first attempt. I'll add a bit of white to some of these lines just to make a few of them stand out. Where those lines are too dark against the darker red, they don't show too much, I'll add in a little bit of white paint. There we are. Tiny bit of shadow to the right-hand side of some of the tassels, the yellow tassels dangling down. Not too much. And this one's got a bit of an open top to it, like I suppose it's like a little shallow cylinder at the top. Yet another layer on the entrance. Maybe just a hint of a bit of lettering on that left-hand side on the bright red panel. Now the shadow behind the lettering, just to give them that three-dimensional look, makes them stand out a bit more. So shadow on the right-hand side and the horizontal, just underneath horizontal lines. And then the middle one. And the right hand one, which is almost totally covered by one of the lanterns, so that's quite a simple one. Stronger line there, a little bit. As I said earlier, this yellow border didn't really didn't stand out too much, so I've just emphasized it a bit with a bit of that dark edging around the border. A few spikes on top of the dragon. I think it is a dragon, not a snake or a serpent. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's a dragon. Just a few little spikes. At this stage, I'm really traveling around the picture and just adding some final touches to it. So it might appear a little bit haphazard the way I'm going around, but not trying to overdo things, but really just strengthen up some lines, objects, edges, values. Generally with a smaller brush and dark paint. Add a bit more yellow to those tassels, almost pure yellow, lemon yellow. It's actually got some cadmium yellow below that lemon yellow, and it might be just coming through. Probably cadmium yellow would be better because it would be brighter and just create more of an impact than the lemon yellow, which is a bit more of a paler yellow. Wash off the brush. A few more specks of yellow just to repeat it through in certain places. Just need to put some finishing touches to the entrance. There's a sort of square sign there. I've just drawn the border for it rather than the actual sign itself. Little vertical there. Just a thin one, just a thin line. I'm now going to use some white gouache paint, fairly thick, with a thin rigger brush. The brush I'm going to be using is a Lebanson brush, just to get in the wires that the lanterns are hanging on. Maybe just a few of the ribs of the lanterns as well. So I'm just working out now these lines, and not a continuous line, bit of a lost and found, so it will be, there'll be a few gaps in this line, but I need to make it look as if I'm connecting the middle of the lantern. That's obviously where they're suspended from. So try and be fairly accurate with that. Not make it too congested just where I am now, just a few lines, and then we've got this one coming up this side. So I'll start at the top against the sky and connect up to the middle, the top of the lantern, line going out to the right, and over to the right hand side. Maybe just a tiny bit around these figures if there's some light coming from inside the temple. Not too much. Don't want to overdo it with the white paint. There's a tiny bit of a light top to that bit of the lantern, so just because it's a bit of a dark background behind, I can get away with it. And then a few of these ribs of the lantern, particularly on the left-hand side at the top. It's going to show up more where I went in quite dark with the red. There we go. Now, a tiny bit on the tassels, on the left-hand side of those tassels. Little downward stroke. Maybe a few other little objects catching a little bit of light at the top of those leaves. I think they look like glossy leaves of a rubber plant or something. So just where I think the sun could be hitting the glazing of the objects and tiling. And that's about it. As I normally do, at the end of the painting, bit of a self-critique session, but my second attempt at this Jade Emperor Pagoda in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Thanks again to Ravi for the kind sharing of the source image, but a bit more looser on this second attempt and zooming in, making more of a feature of the entrance, and a richer, well, darker colours to the certainly to the background temple, and a lot of wet in wet, using the smaller brush for little details. Might have gone a bit too dark on some of these when I was defining the tiles here. Maybe just a little bit too dark. Could have gone in with a slightly lighter colour. But I'm pleased with the result. These two figures might have been, I might have done a bit better by having them darker, I think. In there, this guy's arm is a bit too thick, but they've got a bit of movement to them. They've got a bit of light coming across them, and pleased with the brush marks, and these different edges that I've got as well, dry brush marks in some of the picture, and the strong vertical elements, the actual architectural details of the pagoda, and the strong horizontals, and then introducing a few little quirky diagonals for the shadows just there and over there. Yeah, fairly pleased with it, but it would be great to know. Hopefully you've seen both attempts at the same scene, different approach on each of them. Love to hear of your comments. Pop those comments into, particularly this one if you've seen the other one. I'll put the URL, if you haven't seen it already, put the URL of my attempt number 1 in the description of this one. So this is attempt number 2. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you on the next video.